Let me tell you something strange about the man who never really grows up. We live in a world that celebrates ambition, responsibility, and forward motion, yet some men seem to hover just outside of adulthood, capable, intelligent, full of potential, and still somehow unfinished. And here's the question that always lingers. Is he avoiding life, or is he afraid of losing something sacred by entering it? It's easy to label him immature, lazy, irresponsible, a man-child. But that's not the full picture. Beneath the surface, there's an entire psychology at play, one Carl Jung noticed long before social media, before modern dating, before adulthood itself became something negotiable. Jung called it Puer Aeternus, the eternal boy. And see, for some men, staying young is not about immaturity, it's about preservation. It's about holding on to possibility so tightly that commitment feels like a kind of death. This isn't about judgment, it's about understanding, because if this pattern exists, it exists for a reason. You've seen him, or maybe you've been him. He has ideas, big ones, plans that sound almost poetic. He talks about what he could do, what he might become. But life never quite starts. Responsibilities feel optional. Commitment feels heavy. Time feels abstract. From the outside, it looks like avoidance, like someone hiding behind youth while life moves on without him. Others grow into roles, partner, parent, professional. He stays fluid, uncontained, still searching, still preparing. And people say, he just doesn't want to grow up. But here's what's interesting. The Puer is often deeply sensitive, more idealistic than others, more attuned to beauty, meaning, and inner experience. Psychologists noticed something fascinating about this pattern. It's not that these men lack intelligence or depth. It's that they experience life primarily as potential, not structure. Jung observed that the Puer lives in the realm of possibility, where everything feels open, unfixed, pure. And adulthood, with its routines and responsibilities, feels like a narrowing of the soul. So it's not about being childish, it's about protecting the inner world from collapse. They don't hate responsibility, they fear what responsibility might cost them. Because here's the reframe. It's not about immaturity, it's about identity preservation. The Puer doesn't want to fail at life, but even more than that, he doesn't want to betray the image of who he believes he could be. Failure feels survivable, but disillusionment, that feels unbearable. So staying young becomes a strategy, a way to keep the dream alive. Potential stays perfect when it's never tested. And maybe that's not laziness. Maybe it's grief for a future that hasn't happened yet, but already feels fragile. For many men, this pattern begins quietly, not with rebellion, but with sensitivity. Often, the Puer grows up praised for his mind, his imagination, his uniqueness. He's told he's special, different, destined for something meaningful. But no one teaches him how to translate that meaning into structure. So when adulthood arrives, with its demands and deadlines, it feels crude, uninspired, almost violent. For some, the turning point comes after disappointment, a career that feels hollow, a relationship that asks too much, a world that rewards conformity over depth, and something inside withdraws. Here's what's often misunderstood. People think the Puer avoids commitment because he doesn't care. In reality, he avoids it because he cares too much. He wants life to feel meaningful, and when it doesn't, he'd rather stay unfinished than settle into something that feels false. Jung believed the Puer is driven by an unconscious fear of limitation, because limitation means choosing, and choosing means killing off other possibilities. Psychologically, this is a struggle with psychic containment, the ability to hold oneself within form. The Puer resists that container, because inside it, something might die. And culturally, we don't help, because let's be honest, modern culture romanticizes youth, endless options, infinite choice. We reward those who keep reinventing themselves, who keep flexible, who never fully commit. So the Puer feels validated until the loneliness sets in. Because think about it, when was the last time you delayed a decision, not because you didn't know what to do, but because choosing felt like losing? When did freedom start to feel like weightlessness instead of power? And what happens when possibility never becomes reality? But here's the complexity. Not every Puer is at peace. Some are running from failure, from responsibility, from the quiet fear that they might be ordinary. This is the shadow side, when youth becomes not a choice, but a refuge, when freedom becomes avoidance. Existentially, the Puer sits between being and becoming, never fully arriving, never fully leaving. In a world that constantly says, be something, choosing to remain undefined becomes an identity in itself. Here's the paradox. The Puer seeks infinite freedom, but freedom without grounding turns into anxiety. He wants meaning without limitation, but meaning requires commitment. And over time, the inner world that once felt rich can begin to feel hollow. Yet transformation is possible. Jung believed the Puer eventually must meet his opposite, the senex, the principle of structure, discipline, and time. Not to kill the boy, but to give him a body. When this integration happens, something shifts. Possibility doesn't disappear, it incarnates. Ideas become work, dreams become form, meaning becomes lived. Research supports this tension. Studies on identity development show that prolonged identity diffusion, staying in exploration without commitment, leads to higher anxiety and lower life satisfaction. But when exploration is followed by chosen structure, people report deeper fulfillment and coherence. Neuroscience would call this integration of the default mode network and executive control. Jung called it individuation. Different language, same truth. The Puer is often misunderstood, seen as irresponsible, unreliable, but beneath that, there is often a deep longing for authenticity. Maybe that refusal to settle isn't arrogance, maybe it's reverence. Real confidence doesn't always look like certainty. Sometimes it looks like patience, like waiting until life feels true enough to enter fully. And maybe some dreams need time. Some parts of the soul refuse to grow fast because they're meant to grow whole. So if this reflection resonated, you already know. You can leave a comment below, or don't. Maybe it's enough to simply feel recognized for a moment. So the next time you meet a man who seems unfinished, don't assume he's broken. Maybe he's protecting something fragile. Maybe he's still listening for a life that feels worth committing to. Because being unformed doesn't mean being empty, and growing up doesn't have to mean giving up. In the end, the goal isn't to kill the boy, it's to let him finally live. And maybe that's what adulthood really is.